the question, Emilia, if I remember it correctly, the one you addressed to Herakles primarily, was how do you delineate between economic activities which are best managed through market systems and different kinds of activities where markets fail. It's not that, but as Professor Sos, the markets are simply off the planet. And I was stung by your assertion that I didn't specify the delineation. I thought I did. I thought I said that markets are exquisite systems of for manufacturing and disseminating things. Things that have a material existence, a substance, and things that, in economic parlance, produce no externalities, like apples and oranges. This is the example that Herakles gave. When it comes to ill-defined assets, assets like, love, the beauty of a sunset, the value of human labor. Hey, I'm going to that. This was the next thing I was going to say. Newfangled forms of debt, public health, the future of green technologies and so on. And generally, all those things upon which the continuation of human life on this planet depends. When it comes to these are assets. Okay? If I were to ask you how much money would you want in order to pass me the right for me to murder you, right? You probably wouldn't be able to come up with an answer. Do you know what we teach our students in microeconomics classes? That there are ways of answering that question through the equimarginal principle. Okay? This is how we pollute the mind of the young. These are lovely logical exercises, but when we teach them in a format which lets the young think that this is of practical use. And why do we do that? Because we want to charge them higher fees when they're in business schools and so on, and we need to explain to them why it is that we charge them more. So we take something that in a philosophy department would be a logical vacuous, but interesting conundrum, and to teach it to them as something that policymakers ought to utilize, we end up with a catastrophic failure in the mind of the young. Now, so for me, it's very simple. Things and ill-defined assets. And this is why I was suggesting that, you see, I mean, we talked about shipping, about carbon, and so on and so forth. Look, the last thing we need now is to provide fig leaves to polluters. The last thing we need is to have a discussion about mirrors in the stratosphere, carbon capture, I'm afraid, which is a very dangerous idea, not only because it won't work, not only because we are going to be behaving like children, shoving the rubbish under the carpet, hoping that it will never be discovered, but because industry wants excuses. They want to jump at any opportunity to avoid doing what has to be done, which is what? Moving to a low-carbon economy, dealing with problems that are very important to humanity, but which have no value added. These are the things that we cannot allow to give them excuses not to think of. So this is why I was talking about a Manhattan Project, a human genome project, an Apollo space project. That is, it is the only way of organizing economic activity and giving markets hooks to hang interesting projects upon in order to deal with a very simple reality. Today, we don't have the technology to handle the difficulties posed by climate change. We have some technology, there are interesting avenues, and there are interesting lines of research, but we think, and this is how I'm concluding, and I think that this is my best shot at answering your question. We've had a major success story that we should be celebrating, the ozone layer. The depletion of the ozone, I'm not a physicist, so I don't know. I mean, here I'm going to stand corrected if I'm misinformed, but my impression is that the ozone layer depletion has been reversed as a result of concerted global action. The reason why we could do it was because it was technically feasible and economically not prohibitive to replace CFCs with other new kinds of gases in refrigerating units and so on and so forth. So what we need in terms of turning the browning into the greening of humanity is to create the technology. We don't have the technology at the moment. If we did, then it wouldn't be a problem. And we can't rely on markets to produce it.
Professor Avgouleas insists that I give him the floor, but he forgets two things. Number one, that I also want to take the floor. And number two, in answering the questions. And number two, that democracy makes me give the floor also to others before I turn back to him and to his passion to take the floor anyway right now. I just want to add a few words because from my law perspective, I wanted to say a few things in relation to what you said and to the idea of having an international environmental court. I would like just to remind you a few things about what the state used to be when states were created and what the states are today. And because you should remember that the state is a product of the societies which is started in about the 14th, 15th century. And this specific way of organizing politically a society was consolidated in the 18th, 19th century. We have not always had states. It is a new thing. We have always had political organizations of societies, but not states. And the state, the modern state, just for the sake of teaching students, has a birth time, which is the French Revolution and the Napoleonic institutions. What was the issue then? The issue was the society was agricultural and the beginning of the industrialist society, just the beginning. And in those days, they needed to create a common market in France. I remind you that in France, which is the specific example, to go from one province to the other, you needed to pay taxes. And the capitalism, the growing capitalism of those days needed a market, a true market. And secondly, the capitalism of those days needed the resources. In those days, all the resources were in the hands of the state. The army produced even the bread to give to the soldiers. They produced the forms, the shoes, everything. So the French Revolution took place. They created a common market. So they created the state of today, and at the same time, they unified the laws, codification of the laws. Why? Because every province had another legal system. And they sold out all the wealth of the state. I used to learn when I was young that the revolution was done by the bourgeois, but the truth is that the bourgeois were created by the French Revolution, because they sold out everything. And of course, perhaps they did well, because a new society was born. Now, you have the same thing today in Europe. That's what we do in Europe. We create a common market because between Europe of today and the French Revolution, you had the answers which were given to the necessity for growth was to make a war and take the growth of somebody else, or to have a colonialism and take all the resources from somebody else for our sake. Now, this state does not exist anymore. It does not exist. And I can give you an example. You remember that in America, after a financial crisis, about 10 years ago, two senators, Sarbanes and Oxley, introduced a legislation, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And one of the many things which, if I'm not mistaken, are in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act is that if you have a company which is traded in America in the stock market, and if there is it is suspected that they are using illegal means to take take contracts here or there, then the United States of America has the right to intervene no matter where those briberies took place. So that's how the famous Siemens case started. And America asked Siemens to employ an international company to make the investigation on the expenses of Siemens. And the investigation went to Germany, and from Germany came to Greece. Eventually will go down to Southeast Asia, or I don't know where it is now. If you tell this story to those who taught state and law in the 19th or the 20th century, it is unheard of. I'm giving you another example. Because where is the state to stop it? It does not exist. It cannot do anything. It's a story between the United States of America and Siemens. And it changes everything in Greece, with a state just observing the facts. Another example. It is possible that you have a broadcasting company in Vanuatu. Have you heard of the state Vanuatu, one of the last to join the United Nations? It is a state which the half part of the year it is full of water because the water comes up, but it is a state. It is possible that there a broadcasting authority tells a story that in Greece there is this and that and that. Not true story, but a story which is broadcasted. It only needs minutes to create a political problem in Greece, on the condition that it is taken by the main, taken over by the main channels of the world. And true or not true, this will change many things in our country, and the state will be just observer. I remember when the private television started in Greece, a minister said that if any international broadcaster starts broadcasting in Greece, then we're going to bring them down with a missile. And those are funny things. Now, we have to understand that we are in a period of time where the states have nothing to do with the states which we teach in the university. If the fish, for various reasons, do not prefer anymore the Greek seas and they go out in the ocean, we will have a problem. The states believe that they can stop the fish going out. I can tell you they cannot.
Excuse me, I wanted to ask a question raised partly by the shipping example and the suggestion that we needed more transparency. It's very interesting listening to the panel because you suddenly learn about things that you don't ordinarily find, like how many more times it takes carbon to create a fridge in one country than another, or one continent than another. The possibility that cap is one cause of unfairness, but then the shipping people over here have to suffer. And it made me wonder, for ordinary people, people like me who know almost nothing about this, is there no simple graphical means of showing, for example, something like a carbon cycle? You know, when you're small and in school, you have the thing where, you know, the fish eats this, and somebody eats the fish, and somebody else eats the fish. And you have a simple graphical picture of what happens to carbon that people can understand.